Chapter 18 of Hunters Out of Space. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elliot Miller. Hunters Out of Space by Joseph E. Kelliam. Chapter 18. All this happened while Grim Hagen was rushing toward Odin and Maya. A thin trickle of blood was flowing down the corner of Hagen's mouth. Odin heard the voices. Out of the corner of his eye he saw some men go down. The room felt cold now, and a thin breeze was going through it, as though blown gently across the star spaces. He saw a light dart down toward Grim Hagen. But at that instant, Grim Hagen reached him and swung his sword. Jack Odin stepped aside. His foot slipped upon the unsteady planking of the improvised balcony. He thrust for Grim Hagen's throat, but his blade went high and wide. It gashed Grim Hagen from the lower corner of his chin clear back to the jawbone. Blood streamed, and as Odin slipped to his knee, Grim Hagen swung again. Then Maya was between them, both hands grasping Hagen's sword arm. Hagen's free hand closed about her wrists. He swung her aside, and the point of his sword came down to rest upon her throat. "Now!" Grim Hagen screamed, and his voice was the shriek of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Let no light come near me and Maya, or we die together. Wold and I caught scattered words about your work as I fled through space. I held the stars and planets in my hands and I flung them away, for they were no more than the sparks that fly out from flint. They are worthless and I flung them away, and there was nothing to match my desire, not even Maya. Now listen, if you care for her life." The descending lights hesitated and drew back. Jack Odin righted himself and chanced a thrust at Hagen. The thrust failed as Grim Hagen moved Maya between them. "No more of that, Odin. Drop your sword or she dies. Drop it now." And Odin lowered his hand and let the sword fall to the table beneath him. Grim Hagen continued. "The ship is yours. This world is yours. Let me have your secret, Woden. I would not care to be with such as you. I would laugh at space with the comets. I would make the stars cringe. I would watch the generations go by like falling snow. I would—" "No, you would be like Lucifer, wreaking his vengeance upon the planets," the voice of what had been Wolden interrupted in a whisper. "No, Grim Hagen. Even if I gave you what you asked, all space would seem as hell to you." Grim Hagen smiled an evil smile. "So, but it is I who make the bargain. Even yet, Maya goes with me, remember." But at that instant, Maya got one hand free and thrust the sword aside. It was all the time that Jack Odin needed. Reaching forward, he grasped Grim Hagen's sword with his bare hand. It cut to the bone. And then he had Hagen's wrist with his free hand. He twisted. A bone cracked and he shook the blade from Hagen's grasp. Maya leapt to one side. Then Hagen's fingers were pushing Odin's face back, and Odin was clutching at Hagen's throat. They stood there swaying. Then they tumbled down the rude stairway of tables that Ato had fashioned for his last stand. They rolled to the blood-stained floor beneath, and Odin never knew how either of them survived the fall. The lights hovered above them, waiting for an opening. Maya took up a fallen sword and came following after. Grim Hagen's fingers were feeling for Odin's eyes. Odin got a bloody fist against Hagen's face and shoved him back. Then he rolled on top of him and got the man's throat between his hands. Hagen's fists worked like pistons as he beat at Odin's face. Odin felt the blood dripping down upon his hands and upon Hagen's throat, but he held on. At the last, Grim Hagen screamed and clawed like an animal. And then it was over. The hands stopped clawing. There was one last sob of pain and hate that was cut off in the middle. Then Grim Hagen was still, and Odin, with his face dripping blood, held on while Maya and the others struggled to tear his hands free from the man he had killed. With the death of Grim Hagen, the fight was over. None of Hagen's Brons or Aldebaranians were left. The Lorens threw down their arms and swore loyalty to Val. A cot was improvised for Ato. The lights hovered around him, whispering cheerfully and ignoring all others. Val, Odin and Maya tried to count the survivors. Of the 50 who had lived through the fighting, only 18 were bronze. The rest were Val's men. "There are 100 more on the 2 ships," Maya told Odin. "Oh, Jack, we have Nia to thank for most of this. Nia and Wolden. After you and your men left, Nia took her Kalis, as she called them, and some of her people. They came through the barrier and made their way to the old ship. They surprised the few guards that Grim Hagen had left. They freed me and the other prisoners. Then we got our little army together and came to help. Without Nia, it could never have been done." She buried her face on Odin's shoulder. "Oh, Jack, when we were kids together we used to laugh at her." He patted her shoulder comfortingly, for he could think of nothing to say. He had seen soldiers like Nia, cast-offs from their hometowns, gallantly going to their deaths. It was something that he could not understand, and being honest, he had nothing to say. Cleanup was begun. Jack Odin left Val of the Lorens to take over. Then he rushed to the stairway where last he had seen Gunnar. The fires had burned out. The steps were blackened. A few smoking corpses were still upon the stairs. Odin's face was covered with blood. His strength was nearly gone. But he went up the stairs 2 at a time, his spent breath whistling through his bloody nostrils. There at the top of the stairs he found Gunnar. And Gunnar's dead lay thick about him. Gunnar had moved himself to a sitting position against one of the railings. His chin was upon his great chest and his eyes were closed as though he slept. But when Odin knelt beside him, he opened one eye and looked up with a twisted smile upon his broad face. One side of his face was barely recognizable. Gunnar was badly burned. He had been thrust through at least a dozen times, but Gunnar lived. "Eh, Norse King," he whispered, sitting up straight as Odin steadied him in his arms. "It was a long time to wait, and I thought that sometimes I would not make it. But I held on, for I knew you would come. Oh, it has been a long wait, and it took all my strength." "As fast as I could," Odin answered in a choking voice. "As fast as I could. O chief of the Neeblings, for Ragnarok is past, and the tree of life still reaches into the stars. The twilight is past, and new suns, new earths are quickened, and Gunnar still lives." "Part of him." Gunnar blinked his good eye. "What happened down there? Oh." He gasped in pain. "To have missed the fighting." "Maya lives and I live. Ato is wounded. Wolden came at the last to help us, Gunnar. We won, and I have killed Grim Hagen with my bare hands, even as I promised." "Good, Norse King. I knew always that one of us would kill him. Oh, it was a grand fight, but Gunnar will sharpen his sword no more. There was a ford near my father's house where the clear water ran fresh over the stones. That might help me, but it is far away. My father, too. You tell Frida that we did not make the long trip in vain." "If I can," Odin promised. "Oh, you can. For we have won the stars. Nothing is beyond us. Except youth, maybe." Gunnar closed his eyes and slept for a few minutes while Odin held him in his arms. Then Gunnar awoke. He smiled at Jack and murmured, "To awake on the sea of the stars." Jack Odin had heard Gunnar sing those words before. They belonged to an old Norse lullaby that Gunnar's mother had crooned to him when he was a little boy. Then Gunnar died, and Odin knelt over him, tears streaming down his broken face. End of chapter 18.